French were always heavily outnumbered by the English. They really had no chance, but they had one advantage that the English did not have, and that was the canoe. What they did naturally, as did the Indians who lived in that part of the country, was to use the waterways. And so the waterways were wonderful highways for them to travel into the heart of the continent. So the French learned how to build canoes. La Salle learned how to build a canoe, to use these craft to go all the way from Montreal, basically, to New Orleans, all by water. Well, I've always been interested in, I think, the French in America, because I was seduced by the romanticism of Nouvelle France. The romance of Champlain and the 7 Years' War. I always was sorry that they couldn't have had a different outcome. I was growing up in New England, and the version of history that we were taught was that the brave English settlers, first of all, they landed on the seacoast, and where there was nothing but Indian tribes, and they pushed in. They crossed the Appalachians, where there was nothing but bears and mountain lions and Indian tribes. And they pushed all the way into the Mississippi River, and all through what we were given to understand was howling wilderness. But the fact is, when the English came, there were already settlements. There were already towns. There were already germs of civilization. And it was a very interesting civilization because it was a Métis civilization. It was based on French settlers, French language, French religion, and Native American tradition. The Americans, they've almost erased this civilization out of history.
In your book, you talk about, I think, Norman Mailer.
Well, Norman Mailer is a prime example of this erasing of history, because in his book, Chicago and the Siege of Miami and the Siege of Chicago, where he talks about the 1968 Democratic Convention in the city of Chicago, and he lists a whole long litany of ethnic groups that came to Chicago. And he says, the only people who didn't travel were the French. This is honestly in his book. And I said, Norman, the French founded Chicago, and they founded Milwaukee, and they founded Juneau, Alaska. They were not stay-at-homes. And this is just an example. I'm very fond of Norman Mailer, but it's to me a striking example of the kind of erasure of history when it comes to the French. There's always a feeling of having lost. The people in Illinois lost their land. The French, the Métis, lost their land, their property. The Cajuns lost their homeland. And of course, Quebecers lost New France. The French inhabitants lost New France. So the French lost even the idea of having their own nation. We can see it here now in this lonely spot, which is, it seems, it seems almost, what is this here? What is this fort doing here? Who won this fort? Who lost this fort? Who fought over this fort? It's not something that is very much treated in history. It's more that gospel of the American expanding, manifest destiny, and so on.
Notre sens de la destinée est totalement différent des Américains. C'est le grand Jack Kerouac qui l'avait le mieux saisi.
À gauche?
Oui.
White sands. Hey, that's the name. Penetanguishene means land of the white sand.
Oh, does it?
White rolling sand, yeah. Oh yeah, I like these old brick houses.
Yeah.
It's like back home.
When I talk about being among history's defeated, I'm not thinking about the French Canadians do like the Irish have done, like always writing ballads about how bad the British treated them and so on. The French and Francophones that I knew, obviously, I mean, couldn't care less if you mentioned the French and Indian War, or, you know, if you felt, oh, isn't it terrible that we lost all these colonial wars? There was none of that, but instead there was a sort of a cloud over us. You know, a feeling that we, you know, would never be able to succeed to the extent that we wanted to. That things would be denied to us.
Is this a feeling that you grew up with?
Yeah, a feeling more, it's very subtle, very unconscious, a feeling that we have no home, that we're homeless in the midst of this continent. Now this, curiously enough, is shared, I think, by a lot of people, this sense, and young people, but who are not necessarily French Canadian, in fact, are not at all Francophones, but have this sense still that somehow there's a loneliness attached to the conditions of life in North America. And that this vast continent somehow entraps us as well as liberates us. So Kerouac in particular articulated a feeling very much like that. And I think that's very much part of his appeal to especially younger readers. It's almost like a self-pity. But he does self-pity, Kerouac does self-pity very well.